Good morning and welcome back to the Narrowbox Comics channel. It's been a while since I talked about comics. I've been buried in vintage toys lately, but today I want to dive back into storytelling and specifically why Western entertainment is struggling to create compelling male heroes. I started thinking about this after a conversation I had with my friend and fellow comics creator, John Charles. John is the creator of Techno Freak. There's going to be a link below. Go check that out and you'll understand kind of where we come from. And he's very much from the 1980s, 2000 AD era of British comics. So our sensibilities kind of overlap, but not often. But even he couldn't deny how manga has dominated over the last 10 years. There are many reasons for this, and we've talked about them when we meet up. And we have very different ideas about those things. For me personally, the format, the price point, the distribution, the consistency, these are all things that the Japanese have absolutely nailed. But there is one cultural aspect that has been overlooked by anyone that's critiquing this sort of thing. And that is that in the West, we have literally abdicated the strong masculine male story genre. We completely don't do anything with it anymore. In the West, we've imposed a weird moral framework on our creators in the form of diversity and inclusion policies. They are designed as a cosmic justice approach that fiddles with the verisimilitude of stories in order to create equal opportunities in the casting and crewing of the entertainment productions that they cover. But this has seeped into the writing process itself and led to the kind of heroes that boys traditionally look up to being completely sidelined. This is the reason that you won't be seeing characters like Saitama from One Punch Man and Jinwoo from Solo Leveling in Western media anytime soon. See, back when Marvel and DC were the comic kings, there were widely popular characters like Wolverine and the Punisher that sprang up all the time. But over the years, that kind of has taken a back seat to pushing forward the Captain Marvels, the Miss Marvels, the Squirrel Girls, and with mixed results. Let's just leave it at that. But now, society considers masculinity a problem to be solved. And boys are treated like criminal suspects. We have seen producers trying to re-engineer the male action star and promote women to the lead. The issue is, it simply doesn't work. And as uncomfortable as that is to hear, it's equally uncomfortable to say, but it is just true. It's a fact, unfortunately. The numbers support it. The rise of manga completely overtaking comics in the West proves it. And it's not hard to see how this has happened. There's a general framework that storytellers have to kind of conform to in order to get their stories told. The general rules that I keep seeing being imposed on characters are, there's 5 that I'm going to use today, but there are lots more. Rule 1, the hero must be morally good. Rule 2, he must align with politically acceptable ideologies. Rule 3, he must struggle with his violent urges or have a moral struggle over them. Rule 4, he can never save a woman. Rule 5, his strength cannot be why women are attracted to him. And I'll go over these and I'll give some examples as I'm going along. And let's start with rule 1. But before I do that, actually, first I'll give you some insight into these books. So these are my 2 favourite anime that my son and I watch together. His favourite is Mashal, which is another in this exact genre. And I call this genre the Limitless Male Potential category. It's a category explicitly aimed at boys and deals with a lot of issues around growing up as a boy in society. Now, obviously, these are from a Japanese society, but there are truths and similarities across the culture that boys experience. And boys in the West are not getting these experiences anymore from Western culture. So one of the reasons that I love these titles in particular is because it doesn't just provide escapist fantasy. It provides insight into situations that boys immediately recognise and have to deal with on a daily basis. And these usually revolve around peer pressure, morality, and recognising when people are being disingenuous. So now I'll give some example of how this all works together with those rules. With One Punch Man, we're looking at a character called Saitama. He has somehow acquired an immense level of power and he's fighting ever-increasing threats. And he's defeating those threats with a single punch, hence the titular One Punch Man title. He is the One Punch Man. Now, the thing that makes this story interesting isn't about is he going to win or how's he going to win. He wins in one punch. That's it. We already know that's how he's going to win. That's how he wins all the time. And the story's tension comes from the fact that he is bored and life is not providing the challenges or interesting him. Now, the way this relates to men realized when they were growing up that boredom was a real issue for boys. When we were boys, being bored was like the number one worst thing. It would always lead to negative things. So by dealing with boredom, this story kind of gives boys this insight into how does the ultimate man deal with this, and what would it be like being the ultimate man. And we quickly see that being the ultimate man isn't all it's cracked up to be for Saitama. You know, there's no challenge in his professional life as a superhero for fun. He's not enjoying it. He's feeling it's a grind. His attempts to just relax and chill in his house reading manga, just they don't scratch the itch that he's looking for. There's something missing in his life, and that comes into his life in the form of a friendship with another hero called Genos, who's on he's on his grind. He's on a mission. He's trying to find the cyborg that killed his family in his village, and he's absolutely determined to do it. And something in Saitama kind of respects that, and he almost wants it for himself. So he ends up falling into a friendship with Genos, and as a result, he learns about this world that he's just not been paying attention to. That there's a superhero association that gives you money for being a superhero, which he just loves the idea of because he's always worried about money. Get fame, promotion, and people know that you're being a hero. So he wants adoration, he wants to be respected. And obviously, up until this point, he's just a lunatic running around town in a cape. So he's completely unaware that this has all been going on ever since he's been doing what he's doing. And this is something like the wide world, the sense of your place in the world is really important, and One Punch Man deals with that. And so with Solo Leveling, it's a similar idea. The lead character, but we start in a different position. So One Punch Man, we already come in as he's at the top of his game. With Solo Leveling, we come in at the bottom. So he's a rank E hunter. What this means is there are categories of hunters from A to E. E being the lowest, and then there are a special category for the most powerful hunters, and that's S-class. And we are in a fictional world. It's set in Korea where magical portals are opening, and the magic coming out of them is activating humans and turning them into these hunters. And once you get assigned a magic value, you don't ever change. You are whatever rank you fall into is what you are. And you can never change that. No amount of practice, work, effort, nothing can change it. So the gates are also ranked. When a dangerous gate opens, if it's not dealt with, it does what is called a dungeon break, and monsters come pouring out. So in order to prevent that, they send in the specific rank to the specific gate to clear it. He is scraping a living as a hunter. He goes through a gate that is for his level, but only to find it splits into two, and the gate he ends up going through, the dungeon he ends up going into, is massively overpowered for him. So his entire team nearly get destroyed, and he nearly dies. But somehow he survives, and he gets the ability to level up his powers. Now this is where things start to take a turn for him, and as a result, he has to deal with the reality that he's the only person in the world that can do this, and he has to hide the fact that he can do this. And then he has to figure out how he's going to explain the changes that everyone around him is seeing. So even though the world sees him as a rank E, it's clear as day to anyone that he's not a rank E anymore. He's not getting injured on raids. He's quietly confident. His physique and everything is changing. He's actually getting taller, and there's lots of things explaining that. And this just relates directly to the changes that boys go through, how it's lived out to the full potential, and what the world around you, the realistic way the world around you reacts to you changing in this way. And that's something I'm going to go into when I go over the rules. So now we're going to go into the rules of how this works. So as I said before, the 5 rules. We'll start with rule 1, the hero must be morally good. Now, there is a good reason why this is true. Obviously, we want the hero to be a good guy. Now, this is always established in different ways. But the goal of it is to alleviate any concerns about the character being problematic and is understandable. However, setting this in stone as an objectively true characteristic can lead to what is called the Boy Scout effect that used to affect Superman stories. So it makes him boring, dull, and predictable. See, there's an element of danger that is important to the charm of a character, and it's the hint of unpredictability that creates story branches that can then be explored. Open up the story in new directions that the reader wasn't expecting. There's a brilliant scene in One Punch Man where he's training with Genos, and it ends with Genos realizing how powerful Saitama is, and suddenly realizing that he is absolutely nothing next to this level of power. This guy is a god. And so he begins to doubt himself and what he can bring to the table. But as a result of interacting with Saitama, who's oblivious to his own power and his own strength and doesn't realize what he doesn't know, they actually form quite an important friendship, and that helps Saitama recognize what being a true hero is. So this brings us on to Rule 2. Rule 2, he must align with politically acceptable ideologies. So, in the West, it's not enough for him to just fight bad guys. He has to agree with current political orthodoxy. Any whiff of old school might makes right or traditional masculinity, and the red flags go up in the editorial office. In the West, we tend to try and apply this to villains as well, which is just straight up ridiculous. But this has long been an issue in the entertainment industry, and it goes back way, way, way down the line. When I was a kid, we had in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Superman gets a letter from a little boy who is asking Superman, why doesn't he disarm the nuclear bombs in the world if the countries won't act? This was the thing that they actually went through. We had nuclear weapons. They wanted to do nuclear disarmament, but that's literally like people pointing guns at each other and saying, you put yours away and I'll put mine away. You can kind of see how ridiculous it is. But anyway, this little boy writes to Superman. And Superman unilaterally decides to act and just use his power to get rid of nuclear weapons. However, his actions combined with Luthor's villainy lead to the creation of Nuclear Man and nearly ends up with the world getting destroyed and conquered by an unstoppable villain with fake fingernails and a very coiffed blonde mullet. The reason this film flopped so hard was because it not only actively punished Superman for his narrative decision, but it failed to explain why the idea was terrible in the first place. In order to do this, Superman would have needed to declare himself the ultimate power in the world officially. And so the writers, recognizing this, spent most of the movie contriving ways to bring him down. In the end, the moral of the story is that just because you're the strongest doesn't make you right. A conclusion that is simply not the case in both Solo Leveling and One Punch Man, where the unilateral actions of the heroes often prevent cataclysmic consequences by organizations that are mired in red tape and bureaucracy. This plays out over and over again in One Punch Man. So the organization is so unable to understand that he's the most powerful hero and give him the support and guidance he needs. He's left wandering around while there are planetary consequences kicking off all over the place. The S-Class heroes are completely stretched thin. They are struggling to hold down the threat, and they have got an asset that can punch any enemy in one go. Imagine what would happen if you understood you had that asset and were able to actually deal with it. It's not One Punch Man's fault that they can't recognize that. It's their fault. It's their job. They're supposed to be able to spot, identify, and develop talent, but they can't. They can't do it because they are mired in an expectation, ruling by committee, and they are completely bureaucratic. And so he has to act independently in order to save the day. And that is a particular fantasy I'd imagine in Japan, where they have a much more buttoned down conservative society that is paternalistic. The idea that this strength that you're developing is able to fix real world problems if only you were allowed is part of what helps you develop as a boy. Anyway, same thing with Jinwoo. Jinwoo actively, as he grows in power, has to negotiate the tensions and the political landscape of the guilds and the change in the economic nature of business in a world where magic portals exist. And that in of itself is really interesting because obviously he becomes so powerful that they have to change the rules for him. And then that's viewed as unfairness. A dialogue opens up to the theme of the story of of maintaining and keeping the powerful in Korea, because this is a global economy. If you keep losing all your S-rank fighters to other countries, you become unable to deal with S-ranked problems in your own country, and you have to then import and pay a lot of money to S-ranked fighters to come back to your country to fight these threats. So solo leveling deals with this stuff, and it helps boys to understand how strength is important within the society, whereas in the West we tend to tell boys that your strength is not important, that everyone's equal and we're all the same. It's not true. Right, this brings us to rule 3. He must struggle with his violent urges. I'm going to go to Marvel on this one. Power has to come with guilt or endless navel gazing. The Western comic book companies keep pushing this idea. So the more powerful he is, the more tortured he must be. Now, one of the characters in the Marvel universe that constantly gets this is Wolverine. Now, Wolverine is one of those characters completely free. But the way that they curb him is by putting him in the X-Men. And the X-Men often hold his place in the X-family over him, threatening him with expulsion from it if he ever follows his instincts to kill. Meanwhile, they use him to do the dirty work, to take out Magneto when the story demands it. And it's something I find disdainful, and it's a video in of itself, and I will do a video on that. As a young man, that really annoyed me. I used to be confused about why they would suddenly flip-flop over why Wolverine was allowed to kill one day and then wasn't allowed to kill the next. It was very annoying to read. And ruined the character in some ways. So I didn't really continue reading Wolverine, because it was just the same issue over and over again. It's like, this guy is being held back by this team. With the Punisher, Marvel originally got it right. His mission is revenge. It's a result of a sense of loss. His torture is that he can never get his family back, so he can never stop. But modern Marvel has become deeply uncomfortable with him as a result of real-world associations with the skull logo with the police, and as a result of political ideologies clashing. They have attempted to cancel him altogether. He's back, albeit changed, but he is back because he is such an appealing character. Boys love the Punisher. It's one of my favourites, and I know there's a lot of people out there who really, really like him. So that's really frustrating to see a company actively trying to destroy one of its characters just because they don't want to tell stories about him anymore because of the way those stories actually play out. Again, solo leveling Jinwoo readily encounters morally ambiguous human characters. He will often ponder the ramifications of his actions and look for an alternative course of action when he's dealing with dangerous humans seconds before he completely eviscerates them. See, he sleeps well at night. Somebody means him harm, he plugs them. That's it. There's no need to feel bad. There's no need to worry. But again, we as a society demand that our protectors, we demand that the strong and the able endlessly feel bad or confront these things because we believe that this will help prevent them from becoming evil. This is wrong think. It leads nowhere. And Saitama destroying the enemy and going to sleep at night absolutely fine is a good thing. And boys need to see it. They need to see duty. They need to see consequences, but they don't need to be told that when you do this, you're going to be conflicted forever, because it's just simply not the case. And it also teaches the public that if a person isn't showing these signs, isn't being run through the mill, isn't crying and scratching at the ceiling and seeing a therapist, that there's something wrong with them. Anyway, rule 4, he can never save a woman. This one annoys the hell out of me. The rules around this one have to be vague, because it's utterly unavoidable in many stories. And there is some weird logic that mitigates a hero saving women. So what the writers do is that they will create a circumstance where when the hero saves the woman maintains her autonomy and power. So they think that they're getting rid of the damsel in distress, but really what they're doing is just putting extra steps in the middle of it. So this is usually a case of she saved him first, which is fine. You know, nobody is the one that saves everyone all the time. So again, verisimilitude is not affected. Or she gives explicit consent. Now this one annoys me. So this usually plays out as, are you going to just stand there? Like it just drives me mad. And this does actually play across into the Japanese. You'll see this in manga a lot. The hero will just simply brush it off and ignore it. And it does happen. I've just literally just finished reading Volume 8 of Solo Leveling, and this happens with his sister frequently when he has to deal with her. She's very dismissive, but that's again in a sister-brother relationship. And so you'll get in Western comic books, you'll get a "Are you going to stand around all day? Or are you going to get us out of here?" type thing. It's an extraordinarily frustrating thing, because that speaks clearly to the lack of respect that boys often feel when they are doing what they feel is right. So they're trying to get recognition for an action, but they're told, why are you hoping for praise? Do you want a pat on the head? Do you want a medal? So that kind of frustration definitely boys can relate to. And there are elements of this in OPM and Solo Leveling, but for the most part, the damsel in distress trope never went away in manga. It's just in the West, we think it's a disgusting trope and it takes away women's autonomy. It's not true. Everyone now and again needs help. Rule 5. Now this one is big. His strength cannot be the reason why women are attracted to him. This one is big deal. And in the West, I would ultimately say, if you have a situation where you've written a character that is appealing to women because of his strength and power, you are not going to get that story told. The idea that women might be drawn to a man because he's powerful is absolutely taboo. The hero must be loved for his kindness, his empathy, maybe even his troubled backstory or the struggles he has with his urges or his morality, but never, ever, ever for his raw power. Which is wild, because that's exactly what made heroes iconic to begin with. Batman doesn't become Batman to get the chicks, but you as a reader might feel that that's why you'd want to be Batman. Because contrary to what Western sensibilities tell us, boys learn from a very early age that there will only be love for what they provide. During their young days, where they are on a level with female peers, they are often told the opposite, that they are valued for their goodness and kindness. And as having a son, I've seen this play out. But once they hit puberty and that physical gap between the boys and girls opens up, they quickly discover that isn't true. And it's usually at a time when they're at their most confused and most emotionally vulnerable state. And as a result, you're setting up an expectation here that's just not accurate. Young boys can read One Punch Man, Solo Leveling, and they can see the truth. The reality of this is explored in great detail in Solo Leveling, where the entire world has switched from conventional mechanisms of power to individuals like Jinwoo. In his E-rank state, he was invisible to society. Most people considered him useless, ridiculed and disrespected him. Once he gains the ability to level up, attitudes around him begin to change. First from suspicion that he's hiding something, that he's shady, and then once people recognise his potential as a S-class hero, he becomes a valuable asset. He is courted by the most powerful corporations, offered material wealth, and experiences lots of interest from the opposite sex. Jinwoo navigates this emotional aspect by simply being too busy initially surviving, but later on strategizing and focusing on his own development, i.e. leveling up. Now, this message is too similar to a certain message coming out of certain sectors of the internet, and it is simply not allowed in Western media. It is also that the reason that boys keep gravitating towards male influences and why boys do not resonate with the emotional wishy-washy heroes that they keep getting served. So it's a catch-22. You don't show them reality. They discover reality. They're no longer interested in what you're selling. And that is essentially what is destroying the comic book market. See, these guys are strong. They're cool. They're unapologetic. And they're loved by the audiences across the world because of it. You simply couldn't write them in a Western studio today, though. Not without a million notes from legal, HR, and the Twitter feedback loop. So now we go back to Saitama and Jinwoo. These are guys who break every one of those rules. They're not punished for being strong. They're admired. They're aspirational. And that's why these young men are flocking to stories like Solo Leveling and One Punch Man. Because these stories aren't ashamed of power or strength. Or of the fantasy that you could be unstoppable if you just trained hard enough. Or awakened at the right moment. Western creators used to understand this. Think of Die Hard, RoboCop, Rambo, Batman. Even when those heroes are complex, their strength wasn't something that needed to be apologized for. Now, that kind of storytelling gets filtered, softened, and sanitized. So yeah, I think what we're seeing in the rise of Eastern heroes in Western markets is because, it's not because the West can't write, but we've forgotten how to write for boys. It's almost not allowed that we write explicitly for boys anymore, and I think that's a real shame. I've had it as a publisher. When I tell people that my comics are for boys, I get immediate pushback. Why would you do that? It's because that's the people that buy this product the most, and I just think it's kind of ludicrous that you would make a product that people don't really want, and they like the idea of it, but they don't really want it. So anyway, that's just my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. Am I off base here, or are you seeing it too? What other people think about One Punch Man and solo leveling and everything we've talked about in this video. So like and subscribe if you're interested to hear more things like this. I will be doing a video on that X-Men and Wolverine situation. I'd forgotten about that. That really pisses me off. But yes, definitely going to be looking at that. And I will do a video on the Punisher because he's one of my favourites. But yeah, thanks for listening. I'll speak to you later. Bye.